today to talk about what a typical day in my laboratory was like over the years, in particular back in the halcyon days. But as I thought about this, I realized that there was never really a typical day. So one of the great things about science is that it's, on the one hand, it's very challenging, but on the other hand, you don't get bored because every day is a little bit different from the day before. And what I could break it down to, though, is that as one's career evolves, your typical day evolves in terms of what you are basically what you spend most of your time doing. And it really relates back to the several different things that I've iterated before in these videos as to what it takes to become to be a scientist, and all the skills that you have to acquire, which really take your entire career. And I realized that one of the things that's true, that it takes your entire career, is that your typical day changes over your entire career. And in the beginning, when it's just you go to work and you set up your experiments and you do your experiments all by yourself. And that's good because you think about what you're doing and you learn by doing. You learn that if you don't really think an experiment through so that you have all of your materials and all of the things you need when you sit down to actually put the thing together, you have to have everything ready. And it's actually another, what reminded me of that is my wife, when she's been teaching me how to do French cooking. She makes me get all the ingredients out and I have to line them up in when I'm making a sauce, for example, I have to line them up on the sink top, and so forth. And so she says, you can't, right in the middle of the sauce, you can't leave the burner and go to the refrigerator because you forgot something, and then you come back and the sauce is ruined, it's burnt, and so forth and so on. Same thing happens in the lab. So you got to have everything together. You have to think things through carefully. You have to plan it. And because if you leave out a critical reagent or control or something like that, you just have to do the experiment over again. And that takes time, and that wastes time. And this time is the one thing that you don't have in this business, because every experiment counts. The fewer times you have to repeat it in order to make sure that you really got it right, the better off you are. And so initially it's the craftsmanship of doing experiments and learning how to do them and learning what you can do, what you can get away with, and so forth. And that takes time. I think it took me like 5 or 10 years before I got to be a maestro, maybe, like, if you can say that in this business. As time goes on then, and as you add people to the team, because as I've said before, the science is a team sport, it's up to you to train the team, particularly when you're starting out with just technicians who may be educated in science and skilled in whatever they've done before they might have joined your lab. But each lab is different. You have to really get down to the nuts and bolts and so forth and do the particular kinds of experiments that you're doing in the lab. And so you then become the teacher and the mentor of people. And so you go to work in the morning and you've got it planned out so that you're going to do this experiment. And so you basically are shoulder to shoulder. You work together, getting all the things together and going through the process, which usually takes half a day or a full day to be able to do the whole thing. And it's really so that it's really early on and it's hands-on. And that's when you develop your judgment and your expertise and your experience and so forth, so that you sound like you know what you're talking about, which is a good thing because people are listening to you. And if they don't think you know what you're talking about, they won't listen to you. That works. And then as time goes on, you add students and postdocs. And graduate students are very much like technicians. They have to be taught very carefully and shoulder to shoulder and so forth. Postdocs have been through a lot because usually a graduate student spends anywhere from 5 to 7 years in a lab, and so they know a thing or two. And so a postdoc is decidedly more experienced than a student, but on the other hand, which is a good thing. You like to have experienced people. On the other hand, sometimes whatever they've experienced before, you have to reteach whatever they've learned because they may not have learned it the way you want them to have learned it. The whole thing is a very, very learning process. I think back, now my wife and I are watching these cooking shows on Netflix and so forth. And it's the same. It's exactly the same thing. You know, you bring a young chef into the kitchen, and they've got to be, you know, they have to work at all the stations before they can really put a whole dinner together and so forth. And that's just exactly the same way it is in the laboratory. And during the time when you're growing your team, the time you spend a great deal of time talking and discussing, and lab meetings become very, very important. And how you conduct those lab meetings is also a learning process for the mentor. And I learned how to go about it over the years, first from the different labs I'd been in, but then in my own lab. And some of my students and graduate students and postdocs gave me suggestions as to what would work in a lab meeting and how to make them most very, very productive. And ultimately I evolved a thing that worked for us, worked for me, so that you would, if we had a half a dozen or more people in the lab, I would simply, everybody had an assigned date. We'd have lab meetings once a week. And so they would be like on Friday morning or Friday afternoon, for example, or Monday morning, doesn't really matter. So that one person would present their work that maybe they'd accumulated over 4, 5, 6 weeks. And therefore they could take time to sit down and think about it and put it all together. And because they were, which gives them a chance to practice how to do a presentation, an oral presentation, and how to present the data. And, you know, as time went on and things got easier, for example, with computerized slides and so forth, you could generate your own slides and give in the end, a very polished presentation to them just in your lab group meetings. And these are in preparation for when you start to, you know, go out into the university on the one hand and give in-house talks, and then leave and then go out into the big bad world and give talks. And everybody's judging you the whole time. They're judging exactly what you're saying, how you say it, and how your talk is organized, how it's presented. And this is all part of the whole process of learning how to become a scientist. And so one of the jobs as the mentor is to teach this in these lab meetings. And so that after they presented all their data and everybody's discussed it and so forth, and the meeting breaks up, afterwards, then you take that person aside and you give them pointers as to what was really good and what wasn't so good, and you got to work on that and so forth and so on, because otherwise the people they won't really know how to improve whatever they're doing. So, and it's a fun process. I enjoyed it immensely. And so then you know, as time goes on, and so then you start writing, because now hopefully your experiments have come to fruition, and you start writing. And basically most labs, until the person gets to be really experienced and so forth, the mentor will go ahead and write the first draft, and then you would work on it together with the different people in the lab. As the other people get to be more senior, the person who does most of the experiments, or whose project it is, they write the first draft, and then you go from there. And so learning how to write is a very important process of the whole thing. It takes a long time, and most scientist types, you know, most people that go into science are nerdy scientists. They have to learn how to become more social, and part of that, and that all goes into the communication process. And writing is probably the in addition to the public speaking and presentation, writing is critical. If you can't really get your thoughts down and get it down so that it's persuasive and organized and clear, and you're going to be dead in the water. So part of a typical day or week, it got to the point where, you know, you're so busy during the day, you know, either doing experiments in the beginning or then supervising other people doing experiments, that you can't really sit down in your office and write. You get interrupted. It just doesn't work. So I basically didn't write at all during the week. In the evening, you're so tired, you can't really, you're brain dead because of all the things that have happened that day. So I basically gotten to the point where I only wrote on the weekends. You know, I'd sit down on Saturday morning and I'll write until Sunday evening straight. So that was good. That's why it was good that my wife got so busy in the restaurant, because she wasn't there anymore. And I don't know, the kids raised themselves. but I really enjoyed my writing time, and I'd really get into it, intensely focused for the whole weekend, and then I'd come in on Monday morning with still thinking about what I was going to say in the next paragraph or the paragraph that I just wrote, and how I should revise that, and so forth and so on. But then I would get hit. It would be like, I always likened it to being an emergency room doctor. You go to work, you don't have to prepare. You go to work, and then they just hit you with all these different kinds of terribly sick people and so forth to take care of. Same way in science, because each day is you got to go with the, as I would tell my sons, you got to go with the flow. Yeah, and you got to bend with the breeze. And so the thing is, later on, as time goes on, and if everything goes well, you become successful. You publish papers, and then people invite you to meetings, and you start traveling. So you're not home. You're not home in the lab, watching over everybody's shoulders, and so that your supervisory capacity in the lab starts to, take a hit. And the traveling is fun. It's great. You get to go all over the world, meet people, and all of whom are very interesting for one reason or another. But it takes its toll because you're away from where the stuff is going on, and you're not putting out fires. You're not managing the team, the group, which is one of the other things that happens is that you got to make sure everybody gets along. It's like being a mother with toddlers, and some of them act like toddlers, so you got to keep them from killing each other. So the travel introduces a whole new lifestyle into your days, weeks, and so forth. That is good, but it's also very difficult, I think, in order to keep running the lab and making sure the experiments are moving along the way they ought to be, and so forth. The other thing that comes along with that, as you meet people all over, and so whether you develop friendships with good people, and you basically sort them out, just like everybody does when they get into a group of people. They sort of naturally have an affinity for one person or another, and so you develop a whole cadre of friends. And ultimately what happens is that you spend an awful lot of time then communicating with these people. I used to go home in the evening, and if I didn't spend all day on the phone talking to all my friends all over the place as to what was going on and up and down, I didn't feel like I'd accomplished anything, really. I mean, because that got to be a very large part of the job, is just communicating with everybody. And now that you can do that electronically, it's a little bit easier, because one of the things that you would run into, I used to call them all over the world, and if they weren't available, they'd then call me back, and then I might not be available, and so it's just whatever. But it was very, very enjoyable to talk to all these people, and I loved it. It was great. I was just discussing this whole aspect with one of my good friends from Japan, who came to work in my lab in the mid '80s on sabbatical. He just reminded me. He said, I remember back when I was with you, Kendall, that you spent an awful lot of time in the office talking to people all over the world and on the phone all the time. So while you're doing that, you're not writing, and you're not supervising, and you're not mentoring, and all this other business. As everything sort of rolls along, you're like you're on a big battleship, and you're rolling with the tide, or as time goes on, your technical abilities and that you developed early on in your career. My ambition early on, when I was just a young thing, was I always wanted to be in the lab. I wanted to be doing my own experiments and so forth. But as the team grew, I couldn't do my own experiments because I'd get interrupted somebody wanted me to look at this, that, or the other thing. And so my own experiment would go down the tubes. And so ultimately you stop doing experiments as you become more and more of a supervisor. And as you do that, and as time goes on, the laboratory moves so that you need and you require new techniques to solve a new problem that you've never done. so that you can't really even teach it to the people. And so what happens is you depend on others for the technical abilities, and that's another way. One of the things that one of the reasons that I would be on the phone a lot talking to people all over the place was the fact that I'd be asking them about, well, how do you do this, that, and the other thing, and getting advice on different techniques and experiments and so forth. And if need be, you go to that person's laboratory and you watch them do it. There's no other way to be able to pick up a whole new methodology and technique. The other way is that when people come into the lab, or you recruit people to your lab that have that expertise. For example, we needed heavy duty biochemistry when we really wanted to get into both the IL-2 molecule and its receptor and so forth. And so I recruited postdocs that knew how to do that. And that helped immensely because we could move along much more rapidly than if I had to acquire those capacities and then move from there. Ultimately, you depend upon your team, the people that you're able to attract and will come and work in your laboratory, as well as all of your friends and your contacts all over the place, because those are the people who help you be successful. And so I think I better stop there because I probably would go on with more and more stories, but that's really the essence of what a typical day in the laboratory is. Thank you.